It is now time to move to our second keynote of the day, and one that investigates the why of cash, as well as its role in determining society's payment preference. For this address, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome onto the stage David Little, the Chief Commercial Officer at SBV Services.
Good morning, everybody. Gives me great privilege to be here at the conference and especially today to share with you some of the insights and background information we've managed to capture on what is always an emotive topic, which is cash and cash payment preference. And I think the conversations this morning led by Geeta and the team from Saab and FSA on the stage really set the platform for what we're going to be discussing today. And I would want it to be a discussion, so as I go through the presentation, there's a lot of information to digest, there's a lot of facts that I will be sharing, so please do make use of Slido. Post your questions early so that they can be loaded up onto the iPad, such that I too don't fall foul as the Deputy Governor did and not have questions to answer at the end. So without further ado, let's get into the discussion. In terms of cash usage, when you look back at the physical hard facts around cash, despite all the progress that we've made as a collective payments industry, very little has changed from an overall perspective. When you look at cash in circulation, it continues to grow. And despite all the efforts that we've made collectively, and they really are positive, we have yet to make a sizable, sustainable dent in overall cash utilization within the South African economy. Even further so, when you look at times of crisis going through COVID, cash became even more relevant in the South African context. But not just in South Africa, globally. Cash in circulation rose significantly during that period, which shows that cash still has relevance throughout times of crisis as well. One thing we also know is cash continues to perform a BCM role for other payment mechanisms. In times of crisis and others, people flock towards cash. So when you start to look at the overall dynamics of cash versus digital payments, we realize that actually not much has changed structurally in the South African economy, which really started to beg the question, well, what are we missing? What are we not understanding? What do we need to know more? What do we need to equip ourselves with if we are to get a positive migration from physical to digital? One thing we do know is that it's always an emotional debate. And I don't know about you, but I've seldom seen an emotional, irrational debate backed up by limited facts, ending in a very sustainable and logical outcome. On the left-hand side, you get the cash is dead crew, those that just want to exit cash from the value chain, despite what the customers might think, talking about the high cost of cash, talking about how dangerous it is for not only those that transport it, but for those that make use of it as well, citing things that we need to make sure that we tackle the cost of cash, but from one dimension. The other side of it is the long-lived cash crew, those that would love to see cash continuing in perpetuity. We have lots of access to cash movements globally, whether it's in the UK and their access to cash movements or further afield across into Europe, where they push that pendulum too far and now need to bring it back to protect the most vulnerable in society. For me, and I think for most of us, hopefully, the reality is somewhere in between. But it again begs that question. Do we really understand cash utilization in the South African economy and context? I would purport to say we don't. What we do know, however, through all of this is that cash continues to be a primary payment mechanism in the South African context, which we'll unpack a little bit later. And as a community, we need to further understand the drivers of that if we are to make it a sustainable change in the physical to digital migration. So like I said earlier, emotional debates is not something I do often or do well, so I prefer to fall back on facts, and I think that was the genesis for our consumer study that we commissioned through the University of Pretoria. We really wanted to get an independent body of information up and running that we as a community could leverage and make use of. That it wasn't a one-sided on the cash is here to stay forever or cash is dead side, that it was impartial, that it gave us greater insights into cash utilization, but from a different perspective. We all knew what cash was used for. I think if I asked the question to put up your hand, if you can give me 3 use cases for what cash is used for, everybody could answer that. But not everybody could answer if I said, why do people use cash? What is it they use it for? What is that intrinsic belief that they have that drives them to want to continue to use cash? So we wanted to get a bit more of an understanding. So we undertook a 12-month process with the University of Pretoria to dig into the detail around the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors related to cash payments. Because we believe by understanding that, you'd be much better positioned to understand, well, how do we get that sustainable migration going forward? We wanted to also understand what the payment drivers were. So what are the pros and cons of each of the payment mechanisms that are prevalent at the moment? What are they used for, where are they used for, and why are they used? We also wanted to understand not just what it is today, because today tells us what we're looking at this present moment in time, but more importantly is about what is their future preference, and what are those drivers going to need to be in order to help them migrate and be sustainable going forward. We also wanted to test how real the threat of a cashless society would be, and what the impact of a cashless society would be on the general populace. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that we clearly understood what the impact of any forced migration from physical to digital would result in. Because it wouldn't be the same for everybody, we hypothesized. We think it would mean different things for different subsegments. So as you can understand, through this process, we developed a plethora of information and detail. We surveyed the length and breadth of South Africa, over 4,500 consumers, over 800 retailers, ending over a 90% to 95% confidence level in the data that was collected. So we know that as an industry, we can place reliance on the data and the insights generated by the survey. More importantly, as we got into the survey, we realized that actually, by applying AI-driven behavioral segmentation, we could very clearly distinguish between certain subsets of the broader economy based on their behaviors, their intrinsic attributes, and how they acted and were driven at time of making a payment. The last point on this is around, we made sure that we stored this in a relational database so that we could, as an industry, further question and interrogate that data. Because the questions I have about cash, usage, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors may be very different from anyone in this room. So the beauty about the study that we conducted is that it becomes a resource for all of us to leverage, that we ourselves can ask certain questions on geographies, religious beliefs, attitudes at time of payment, etc., etc. And it really is now something that we as an industry can leverage to propel us forward in understanding the why of cash. So the first thing we're going to share with you today is the outcome of that behavioral segmentation, and give you a sense of who are these South African cash consumers out there? What drives them to make payments? What are their beliefs and attitudes towards that? So what we can see here is that through that study, we identified 5 distinct behavioral segments, and each of them have different characteristic needs and preferences, which is what is driving their behavior. On the left-hand side, we started with the cash reliant segment, moving on to the cash status, cash functional, digital adopter, and digital migrator. We plotted them on a linear scale. On the left-hand side, the cash reliant segment, their future cash preference is for cash. And on the right-hand side, their future payment preference is for digital. As we stand today, 64% of the current population's future payment preference is pro-cash. That is a significant number. So as we sit here today and look forward at all these wonderful things we're doing as a payment community to drive digitization in our economy, surveying those individuals that use the cash payment mechanism, 64% of them are telling us we would want to continue to use cash. We'll unpack that in a bit more detail per segment in the forthcoming slides. 36% of the population, however, are pro-digital. They want solutions. Many of them are already digital. But the overriding principle across all these segments is singular. There is not one segment here that does not make use of cash today or wants to make use of cash tomorrow. So you can conclude from that that there will always be cash in the economy to varying degrees. And we need to understand a little bit more about what is driving that cash utilization if we are to make a sustainable migration towards a digital economy. Moving on to talk a little bit more about the different segments, because it's quite interesting as you get into the detail. And again, there's a lot of information that sits behind this, and I'm sharing very select facts with you today, and encourage, please, questions on Slido. So the cash reliant segment, which contributes roughly about 22% of our South African population, these are the strugglers in our economy. They are defined by using cash as their primary and often only form of payment. So when we talk digital inclusion, when we talk financial inclusion, this is the segment where really we've got to do a lot of thinking around how we make sure we look after the cash reliant segment in that new digital economy. 99% of them use cash today. 88% of them are cash positive tomorrow. Taking digital solutions to them that don't solve for their cash requirements will fail. We need to understand what those drivers are that will enable them to move digital, should we so wish. Throughout this process, we've managed to bust a number of commonly held beliefs. So in a cash reliant segment where cash is their primary and only form of payment, 49% of this segment has access to and have used a digital wallet, an e-wallet, or a QR code. Why? Because they had a need that needed to be solved. They needed to solve for transport. So they leveraged those products that were digitally enabled to solve for that need. They solved the transport need through a digital wallet. But 49% of 22% of the population in this cash reliant segment are actually leveraging digital as we speak today. The penetration question is a good one to ask, which we can get into in part of the solutions. But the first myth that was busted was that actually there is quite a digital prevalence, even in the most cash-reliant segments of our economy. 98% of them were, however, positive about cash in the future and wanted to continue to use it. The three main behavioral drivers of their payment preference were availability, cost, and ease of use. Very important things we need to solve for and contemplate in that digital future, should we migrate this section of the economy, is around making sure that we can take solutions to this segment that are cost effective, that are always available, and that are easy to use. Cash currently provides that for this section of the economy. Who knows what our digital solutions can do going forward. The second segment is around the cash status. Love this section, love talking about it. They are known as the gifter. So as you delve into the detail around this segment, is you start to understand that they derive a status from using cash. A status they don't derive from using a purple card, a black card, or any other color card, even one with their face on it. They derive a status from being able to support their communities through cash. They derive status from fulfilling their religious beliefs and in being able to act out the values that they prescribe to through the use of cash. A far cry from what you'll hear sitting in a digital workshop about how we want to migrate consumers from physical to digital. 15.9% of the South African population prescribe to this as a segment. It's a phenomenal number of people that use cash for something that we actually probably didn't even know that they used it for. What we do know is that this segment of the population is actually sitting on the latter end of the cash requirements or cash future continuum, and would quite easily adopt a digital solution if it presented itself in the right form. 87% of them use digital today, but 99% of them use cash. Starting to get that not an either or but and conversation. Looking forward, 51% of them are neutral about cash, to say, well, I'm not quite sure if there is a solution that enables me to fulfill my behavioral desires around using cash, well, maybe I will move. But show me that solution. We haven't yet developed it. Their three main behavioral drivers for using cash are, again, cost. Why cost for this segment of the population? Well, if I walk into my community and I give out 100 Rand, that individual gets 100 Rand in the pocket and walks on. If I e-wallet or I send it through other means, maybe they don't get 100 Rand. Maybe they only get 99 Rand 50, or in some cases, minus 36 Rand. They could get a lot less. So it's very important to understand those behavioral drivers of why this segment of the population is using cash. The second one is values. Whoever thought that using cash is linked to your values as an individual? Well, here we have 9.5 million South Africans that actually attach cash to the values that they prescribe to as individuals. That's why it's so complex to design these digital products that actually transfer those values into a digital solution that can service this market. The last one is quality of life. It comes through quite a lot in the latter stages of what we'll talk about, is that in using cash, it enables that individual to have a quality of life. Quality of life derived from being able to provide cash to the community, to fulfill their intrinsic desires to want to give back and to help those around them. Fascinating segments, and one of my favorite. Yes, they do also like to splurge the cash. So walking into I won't say the Saxon World Shebeen or anything like that, they do like to put the cash on the table, and they derive a status from pulling out the 100 Rand notes. The third segment that, from a behavioral perspective, that emerged, and it was so distinct that by its very nature, we called it out by saying that it's a cash functional segment. They show an extremely high propensity to use cash, 97%. Majority of this segment get paid in cash, and they live their lives in cash. Referred to as the cash shadow economy. Very seldom does the cash that this segment of the population receive actually go into a formal bank account. It starts off in cash, gets spent in cash, and remains in cash. They have a functional requirement for a digital product that is not there yet. This segment of the population is one that is extremely open to digital migration. They're ambivalent about the future. But as it stands today, there is no solution that services that particular requirement for them. What's very interesting is that this section of the population is predominantly found in the agricultural sector as well, dating back, I think, to some of the practices of the past, where cash was the payment mechanism, still is the payment mechanism. That's how they live their lives. Interestingly, on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, you'll see the behavioral drivers behind why do they use cash. Simplicity and fit, cost, and as a financial tool. So receiving that cash payment enables them to budget effectively for the month. So when you're designing digital solutions for this section of the economy, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about something that's simple, easy to use, that again is cost effective. Third time I've mentioned cost effective across all the segments. And also that provides them with the ability to do financial planning, to be able to do budget and control their expenditure throughout the month. 78% of this population already use digital tools. So again, is it an availability issue? No, it's a functional issue. Are we designing digital products to solve needs of the consumers, or are we developing digital products to solve our needs? That question can appear on Slido later, I'm sure, as well. The next segment, moving along quite quickly, is the digital adopter. So this is the fourth segment that we are talking about today from a behavioral perspective, and the first one with digital in its title. It's a very significant segment, 16 million, representative of 16 million South Africans, 26.7% of the population. 99% of this digitally orientated, digital-first segment still use cash. Again, it's a and discussion. Today, they're 80% positive. They say, I'll use cash if in that situation it services my need. I don't think there's very few members of this, let's call it digital adopter group, that don't have 6 or 7 payment apps on their phone. They're quick to adopt, but they're quick to drop. So that 16 million number, probably we're all counting them as customers. We're all saying, well, I've got a new digital customer. Yeah, 90% drop off after first use because it doesn't service my need going forward. Very fickle. They will use and move if it doesn't serve their purpose. What's interesting going forward, however, is that 55% of them are still watching this movie play out, so to speak, where if there was a digital solution that could service more of their needs, they would move. However, cash is servicing their need currently, so there's no massive push to move them over. Again, their behavioral drivers are simplicity and fit. Cash provides that for them, as does the first use digital product that they make use of. QR code, that's great, I'll use it here. Move on to the next door. Ooh, no QR code, okay, let me pull out my cash. So they're very situational driven, making sure that they use that payment mechanism that is simple and fit for purpose. The last segment that we'll touch on is the digital migrator. 97% of this population see a digital-only future. They're very happy to move forward. Another 16 million members of the South African economy. 26% of the population are saying, we're comfortable, we'll go digital, no problem. What's also very interesting, and contrary to popular belief, this is a segment with the widest income categories. So we used to think to ourselves, well, no, digital, it's only for those that can afford it, and it's the more, affluent members of society. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, right? Widest income categories fall within the digital migrator segment that said, yes, I'll move. What's also very interesting about this segment is that they are very loyal, that they prefer to go deep rather than wide. They'll go into taking a banking app and everything that comes with that banking app. They'll take a wallet and everything that comes with that wallet. So penetration is deep and loyalty is high in this particular segment, unlike the previous one where they're quite fickle and they'll situationally choose whichever one they want. Again, 96% of the highest digital segment or highest propensity digital segment still use cash. So it is again one of those and debates, not an either or. Fascinatingly, their behavioral drivers are trust. They seem to be quite open to trusting the digital products that they receive. Trust hasn't come up in any one of the previous segments. They trust the digital solutions more than most. Simplicity and then interdependence, which we've discussed as well. So again, a great view into the segments of the South African cash economy. And you can also understand that each one is so unique, and there's a plethora of data that sits behind supporting each one of them, that each one of them needs to be solutioned in a different way, understanding the drivers and the payment behaviors that exist within each. We're going to move away from the behavioral segmentation now. That was the first outcome of the study. Please post any further questions on Slido as we move through. There were a number of other key insights that have come through from the study, where we were able to interrogate the data set that we had created from various different angles, and a lot of information and a lot of key facts that bust many of the myths that we all believe today through groupthink and others are important. And I'll take you through some of those now. The first one, as we know, and it's probably common knowledge to all, is that cash remains the predominant payment mechanism in South Africa. 96% of consumers use both cash and digital. 96% of our population is cash and digital. So it's not a cash versus digital. It's not a cash or digital. It's a cash and digital. 96% of us in this table, around these tables and out in the population, still use that. For the lower half of the income segments, cash is the number one payment mechanism, which I think we can all understand why. And it is that across all of the payment types. The upper half, 45%, is a little bit different. Cash is still a king, but just a little bit less of a king. Number one payment mechanism in 5 out of 15 categories. We do, however, see through the chart on the right-hand side there that digital availability, digital solution availability is there. It's more about adoption based on needs and requirements that those customers have to fulfill. It continues to be, and will continue to be for some time to come, the predominant payment mechanism out there. And if there's one takeaway from this slide, that please remember, 96% of consumers are cash and digital. One of the other key insights that we were quite astounded by as we went into the detail is that needs, attitudes, beliefs, and circumstances are more predictive of cash preference than usage, geography, and status. Provinces are unique. Microeconomies are all unique. So broad-based solutions that cut across one geography called South Africa are not going to be as successful or as sustainable as they can be, or should be for that matter. The one call-out in exception is agriculture because of the construct of the industry, whether it was grape farming in one location or 3 locations, or whether it was avocado farming, wherever it might have been. There was a lot of congruency between the way in which the structural dynamics of that industry were set up, that there was congruency across payment types and behavior. Contrary to popular belief, us old, what do they call us, fuddy-duddies, age is not an indicator of payment preference. Contrary to popular belief, we've seen a rapid uptake of digital products up into the upper echelons of age categories, where now it's less of an inhibitor than it used to be. It used to be at one point in time extremely prevalent. I still get my 14-year-old daughter to teach me some digital things on the side, but when it comes to payment preference and payment utilization, age is becoming a far less indicator than it used to be, and it's not prohibitive anymore. Very interestingly, there is absolutely no straight link between ethnicity and segment that we showed earlier. Within many sections of the population, even the most cash-reliant segment, there's a strong population of white, African, Indian, and other segments. It's actually well represented. So gone are the days where it is a primary indicator. It is an indicator, but not a primary one. I think the only segment that we could identify through the AI-based tools that had a slight bias, and that was a gender bias, is the cash functional segment, given the constructs of the industry and how it works and that society that supports it. Again, we've mentioned that digital adopter had the widest cross-section of income brackets. So income is also becoming less and less of an indicator of payment preference and you know, what I will use at point of purchase, which again tests some of our learned beliefs. We've always believed, well, the more you earn, the higher digital you become, and whilst that is true to a certain extent, it's no longer a primary indicator. And then lastly, education. Financial education is something that is all of our prerogative. We need to make sure that we uplift financial product education, financial services education. But what we're talking about here is much more fundamental. It's less about the digital products and solutions and the rest of it, how to use them and so on. It's the foundational education that needs to be addressed if we are to make meaningful inroads into digital inclusion and widening participation in digital products. Cash versus digital usage, phenomenal insights coming through from this particular segment is cashless solutions and strategies are appropriate for only 36% of cash consumers in the future. So albeit we've sat around the table today talking about all those wonderful things we're going to do, it's only addressing 36% of what the cash consumer actually needs to be solved for. Let us go and understand more what the cash consumer needs in order to up that percentage potential. I think importantly here, digital payments must integrate with cash solutions first mile, last mile. I said earlier, in the most cash-intensive segment of our economy, there was a high propensity of usage of e-wallets because they've solved that transport issue through the use of that product. We need to understand cash in, cash out, and everything in between. One of the most fundamental pieces we picked up through this research was that we are creating significant technical debt and digital clutter. It is becoming more and more confusing, not only for retailers and consumers as well, to get together to understand what payment mechanism must I use when I walk to till point. You used to walk down the gondola aisle to get to the checkout. You now stand at the checkout looking at the gondola aisle of all the payment mechanisms that you can make use of. It is creating significant challenges in terms of digital adoption. I'd rather not try because there's so many and just stick to what I know, cash, than actually try and make sense of all of these payment mechanisms that are suddenly starting to appear. And it's something that as an industry we really need to consider. Tim mentioned earlier about CDBC and the role that could play and where that fits into the economy. We need to be very clear around that ecosystem of where these components will play a role. Cash versus digital usage, going a little bit deeper into understanding the different drivers of their preferences from the upper half and the lower half, a lot is made of the personal security issues that are prevalent with cash. Funnily enough, that is far less important, to the extent of 27% less important than ease of use, fits lifestyle, and accessible. So I'd rather carry money in my jacket pocket, go and make that payment because it's easy to do and I know and I can trust it, and worry rather less about being mugged on the way there, which is very important to understand. I think the second part on the upper half is that if you look below the line at the non-cash components, they're all green, more trustworthy, easy to use, fits my lifestyle best. So the conundrum we sit with is how do we transport those values and that understanding and the drivers to the lower half around cash, to say how do we make sure that the digital products we're producing are addressing some of those concerns and fits the behavioral desires of those particular segments. This one is very close to my heart in personally, and also I think many of us in the room, is that cash remains a social imperative, right? We tested two very important concepts with the survey recipients in face-to-face interviews where we could actually judge the emotional engagement with the individuals. We tested two things. The first one, a cash penalty scenario. We asked the recipients, how would you feel if suddenly tomorrow you were penalized for using cash? Let's be very clear, it wasn't a pleasant feedback from many in the population. 22% of them said we will actively resist it and there will be social upheaval should we be penalized for using cash. And secondly, we asked them, what would you feel like if suddenly cash disappeared? The same response came through. So we realized that actually the emotion experienced in the boardroom between physical and digital, and that emotional debate that happens there, is mirrored down into the consumer segment, where it's as emotional for them, the decision around cash and digital, and migrate me responsibly, don't just leave me high and dry. Large portion of the population, 30% of them in fact, said that if you move without taking me with you, my quality of life will deteriorate. I will not be able to live my life sustainably should we rapidly migrate. You will leave me behind. When we talk responsible migration, a very key consideration that we need to bear cognizance of. And then I think lastly on this slide is that we need to make sure that for digital to be relevant to all segments, the focus needs to be on providing solutions which consider and incorporate their needs and preferences. So it's fine for us to say we've got an imperative to migrate you to digital products, but are we holding ourselves to account that those products and services we're moving them to solve their needs and serve their preferences? A lot is made about cost of digital solutions and physical solutions and trust associated with those two different types of payment mechanisms. Cash is not costly for the end user. In many scenarios, the end user doesn't pay to access that cash, to get hold of that cash. It's often given to them. It's often provided to them by whether it's their employers or whether it's a peer or whatever it might be. Cost of cash is not a consideration for the majority of consumers. Hence why we see SASSA grant payouts going onto card. They're digitally, money goes out digitally, gets converted into physical, and they live their lives. It's not costly for them. They get free taps as well, right? So the card enables free taps at merchants, but they would rather use the cash to go and transact and live their lives, knowing that it's not going to cost them any more at any point in time in the ecosystem. So we must quickly get around the table to understand that dynamic, is that we talk cash from a cost of cash back in supply chain perspective, but for the end consumer, not costly at all. Trust is a big issue. And trust, when you're walking into the store to do a payment, if I've got cash in my hand, I know I'm going to transact. Load shedding and the rest of those current challenges that we are experiencing have no role in the life of cash. I walk in, I put my money down, and I can make my payment. And I can walk out with my goods and services. I trust that that is going to work for me. That trust is not yet transferred over to any digital solution sufficiently for us to be able to migrate sustainably. Very importantly, the intrinsic link between merchants and consumer. I was very pleased over breakfast this morning to bump into one of the only retailers that sits around the table, Massmart. The role retailers are playing in the cash economy and the digitization of that cash economy is significant. One of the largest retailers listed on many stock exchanges that has a very diversified business, 80% of their current sales is done in cash. Everything from furniture to sneakers to clothing to you name it is done in cash. In fact, they're even distributing cash loans out of their stores. So whilst we sit and as a payments industry consider how do we digitize, we cannot leave the retailers out of that conversation. And this is testament to that. Look at the congruency between the consumers and the merchants around the behavioral dynamics. A consumer will not migrate to a digital solution if it does not service and support the retailer. And when I say retailer merchant, I'm talking the SMME. So if the SMME and the consumer are in a conversation around a payment transaction and the SMME says, please don't pay me in that way because it costs me more. Well, they won't. They'll transact in cash and vice versa. So that intrinsic link between the merchant, whether it's large or small, is so inextricably tied together that any sustainable migration activity must consider that. And we need to also clearly understand that the level of trust and values link that exists between the merchant and the consumer at this stage is stronger than any other payment player out there. Again, if we delve a little bit deeper into the interplay between the merchants and the consumer, we've mentioned that intrinsic link. So when you start to think about how do we get that migration happening, how do we take them along the journey together, it really is about taking them on the journey together. If you rush the consumer piece without the merchant being where it needs to be, you won't be sustainable and successful in that migration effort, and vice versa. So it's those ecosystems, those closed loop, let's call it, opportunities to move consumers in and merchants along the same journey together. If you look at, again, the graph on the bottom left-hand side there, merchant accepts and consumer users. Acceptance and usage go hand in hand. But it doesn't mean to say just because it's available that it will be used. And doesn't mean just because I want to use it that it'll be available. It's got to service the needs of both parties in order to be successful. I'm watching the shot clock here. I've got 7 minutes left and I do want to save some time for questions. So those are just some of the snippets and insights that we've derived from the study thus far. As I said, there's a lot more that as an industry we can leverage from the study. We can ask a lot more questions of the data we've created. We can delve into certain subsects, whether it's by geography, religious beliefs, or others, and really get some good further insights that we can take forward and help us on that strategic journey. I think some of the key takeouts that I'd like to share as well at a bit of a broader level, that we need to continue to remind ourselves of this as we move forward along this journey, is cash is and remains a trusted partner which will continue to play a predominant role going forward. So any digital conversation in the absence of understanding the cash components, probably not going to be successful. We've seen the feedback, 96% of all consumers use cash. So designing digital solutions in the absence of understanding cash, probably not going to be that successful. Secondly, it's about the ecosystem, cash in, cash out, what happens in between. We need to understand all of those interrelations to make sure that the solutions we design are sustainable over time. There are certain assumptions and beliefs around cash usage and cash utilization which are not correct. And we've seen that. But what are we doing about it? We heard earlier a lovely presentation by Kesha around some of the insights that they've gathered from the environment as well. We need to test some of our learned beliefs and assumptions if we are to progress down the digital journey that I think everybody wants to move along. These results are available, and we would really like to provide that in a way in which we can all start to leverage from that and inform and correct some of the misconceptions that are out there. What we do know is the cash value chain is changing and changing rapidly. There's new players entering into the environment, whether it's a fintech level, but more importantly, where retailers are asking to take on a lot of that burden into their infrastructure. That cash value chain is changing and morphing. Banks are shutting down infrastructure, but the cash is not going. Cash is just moving to a different part of the value chain. So we need to understand as well from a regulatory perspective, what role do retailers play in the payments economy going forward, and how do we make sure that the regulatory frameworks extend across? That's why the PIB is so important, because it starts to consider all of those things. In the absence of having those conversations, we're not going to be sustainable in the solutions we develop. And we also need to make sure that it is integrated and make sure that we remove the friction of all the handover points that are in between. The fourth key point is around it's an and conversation. I showed earlier the picture of long live cash and cash is dead. I think we need to move away from that. I think collectively we need to get into a safe space that says, how do we design solutions that are both physical and digitally integrated, that solve for customer needs, not solve for one or the other need, that we solve for the customer in mind. And the last key takeout from today would be to say that there are inherent structural issues in both cash and digital that we need to solve for. It is an ecosystem. We do need to make sure that we're collaborating around innovation, that we're looking at different business models, different ways in which we can put the physical and digital worlds together to solve real customer problems and address the behavioral requirements that they need. So in conclusion, I call it a new equilibrium. I think we need to, as a payments industry and as a cash and digital fraternity, hold hands and work together, walk towards that new equilibrium where we're co-creating solutions that solve customer problems, that it's not taking solutions to customers, that it's understanding customer needs and designing solutions that will fit. Forced migration, not the way to go. We've seen a lot of, let's call it draconian measures coming through the system in other jurisdictions where they move the pendulum too far and it only swings back. I think we've got the opportunity to front run that through the analysis that we've done here and elsewhere, is we understand how do we design that future, how do we design with the end in mind, that we don't push the pendulum too far, but also that we do not push it. We must push it. We must move it. But we need to do it sustainably. And I think through a collective wisdom, we'll be able to do that. What we do know is that no digital cashless solution can be viable if it's not centered on a holistic offering and it's not needs or values based. We need to make sure we have that at the back of our minds whenever we're in these product design forums or elsewhere, to make sure that we design sustainable solutions. So our journey of socialization has been quite extensive thus far. We've shared it in detail, in a lot more detail than we've done today with PASA, with BASA, with many of the banks. Feedback has been exceptionally good, and we really are pleased that this consumer study has started to influence the way we think about cash in our economy. It started to influence the way in which we are designing strategies for the future, and hopefully we can do more of that, more of the engagement, and have more opportunities to share the detail that sits behind it, whether we're developing competitive product strategies or whether we're designing payments ecosystems collectively. This body of research can certainly help in that endeavor. We're not stopping here. We believe that the demand side of cash needs to be a lot better understood. This is the first step in that regard. We've kicked off the second piece of work around the merchant cash study, where we're doing a similar study but into the depths of the merchant environment to really get to the heart of understanding what is it that drives them, what is it that they need to have solved for going forward from a cash perspective. We're also unpacking the hidden cash economy, and as mentioned earlier, one of the key things around the hidden cash economy is a cross-border transfer, particularly with our neighboring countries. Do we really understand that cash economy? Do we really understand how that's playing a role in driving cash and cash utilization? So that's what's on the agenda coming up. My shot clock says 1 minute 31 seconds. So that's it from a research perspective. I'm going to go and have a look at the Slido to see if there are any questions that have come through. Thank you. Okay, significant. So, and we've just lost the questions. A minute. A notepad and pen might have worked quite well. No, we don't seem to have them. No? Ah, there we go. Thank you. So one of the questions first up was what was meant by forced migration? Who or what will force migration? Various different actors and role players in that forced migration journey. The regulator is one. So forced migration in terms of regulatory policy that says we want to limit cash in circulation, we want to decrease cash in specific areas, and then regulation is passed. That would be a form of forced migration. Another one, which we forced migration via stealth, occurs when banks start to limit access to cash by pulling back on cash infrastructure, making it less available for the general populace to make use of. So it's the actions we as an industry will take to force a digital solution on the consumers rather than allow the consumer to decide what solution they would prefer. Another good question is, to what extent is the customer taken into account when designing these payments products? Are customers consulted on what they need? It's a very good question. I think the answer lies in each and every product design does look at the customer, but it looks at the customer from one lens. Either my business, my income segmentation, my way of thinking about customers for my bank, for my fintech. What it fails to do is look holistically, which is what this study presents, is to say, well, let's not look at only one section of what we think is representative, but more holistically. So I doubt that the customer insights are not necessarily taken into account, but holistically not really understood. Anonymous asks, if cash remains this relevant to all customers, then should we not look for better cash solutions versus forcing digital? Fantastic question, yes. I think the answer is yes, but it's not an either or, it's an and. So we can't stop in designing and developing digital solutions for the cash-based economy, but we do need to get better cash solutions as well for that section of the economy. So it's an and conversation. The tie between fintechs and cash management companies and banks and retailers is absolutely quintessential to make sure that we design sustainable solutions. Is the SA future a matter of cash digital blend rather than a shift to digital? Peter, spot on. Absolutely right. It's cash digital blend. We need to understand 96% of the current SA-based economy will use cash and or digital to service their payment requirements. So it definitely is an and conversation. What was one of the biggest surprise findings from the study for you? Sure. There were many that came through, but one that really sort of stands out, and it's generally sort of understood, I suppose, is 55% of our current population lives on under 1,200 Rand a month. Let that sink in. 55% of our population lives on under 1,200 Rand per month. Designing digital solutions to solve for that is very difficult, price sensitive, etc. So one of the things we have to do, and one of the key takeouts that surprised me, is that we have to get to an understanding around how do we make cheaper, free access to digital services in order to migrate what is a large portion of the economy that could otherwise unafford it. And the last one, before I get chased off the stage, is are you seeing the pendulum swing back in a big way in Nigeria's process to remove cash from the economy? Yes and no. So it all depends on the regulatory stance. Where the regulatory stance is very firm and there's absolutely no movement, it will prevail. But what we then start to see is a shadow-based cash economy starting up outside of the regulatory framework. So similar to what Herman mentioned yesterday, you can't wish away or cancel Bitcoin. I don't think you can wish away or cancel cash. So regulation will play a role, but it probably will remain in circulation. Cash doesn't leave a paper trail, which means they can't be taxed. Isn't this a key factor affecting how cash is used? Yes, indeed. The predominant payment, the most prominent service paid for in cash is transport. Tax avoidance, maybe. Thank you very much. Thank you.